All right, guys, so we've been in How to Study the Bible. We've gone through a progression in the past several sessions of the observation, then interpretation. So we've kind of landed in session 6 here on application. The question we have for you is, what are some filters that you use to get maybe like a grand, more theological, biblically based concept, like to actually filter it down through to something that can, put some skin on it, like something we can practically use that's helpful for a specific audience. So another question might be like, what audience do you usually prepare for, even as you study in preparation for a sermon? But even beyond that, like what audiences are you thinking about as you go into Bible study and you try to land this thing in something that we can actually tangibly use in life?
Quite a few filters, actually. Of course, you're going to start biblically, right? So making sure that whatever passage you're using is in a correct context with a correct application because of that context. So that's like the one that's completely out of bounds. I grab this verse and I use it for some odd thing. Yeah. So kind of assuming that you're handling the Bible correctly. I'm probably gonna start with who I assume the audience is. So like when we're speaking on a weekend service, I make the assumption that I'm talking to people who are biblically illiterate. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to assume that they're not going to make the right ties between the Old and the New Testament, that they don't know who Joseph was. Right. I'm going to explain all that kind of as we go through. And that's going to cause me to also assume that they don't get big theological concepts. So I'm probably not going to use words like sanctification, justification, those kind of things. I'm going to try to put that into a common vernacular.
Sure.
And what that forces me to do then is it causes me to take the concept, put it in a language that makes sense, and then it allows that language to land with what I would call, I don't know, Tony, you may too, I just call it a handle. Basically, I look and say, if you can't pick this idea up and take it and use it,
that's good.
I failed you.
Right.
So I'm gonna push it all the way through that. I'm gonna assume you're biblically illiterate. I'm going to assume you came to church because you had a problem. You probably didn't come to church to find God. You probably came to church because your marriage is on the rocks, sure. Right? So I'm going to try to answer that problem. One of the things that I've learned over the years is that people of my generation, so I'm 42, my generation older, they say this. They would say, tell me the truth and I'll do it. Okay? People of a younger generation, especially people like in their 20s, say this, tell me what works and I'll accept it as true. So the way that we bring them into the Bible has to be with like this works. And it's what makes sense to their thinking. Sure. So I'm going to look at that audience and I'm going to do those kind of things. I'm going to look and say they don't know the Bible. They think like this. How do I bring this concept down through a common vernacular, put it into their way of thinking that leads them to this biblical application?
Yeah, I like the word you use there, leading. It seems like at every point in the process, you are kind of holding their hand or walking alongside with them through that path to get from what you're talking about in the scriptures all the way through to actually landing it in their context and their application. Would you say that that's true? Or
yeah, absolutely. I think along with what Jeff said, I totally agree with that. I think a very, very key verse I love is Nehemiah 8:8. It says that they studied, that the leaders read the Bible so that everyone could understand it in their own way, like that everyone could understand the sense of what it meant. And so I agree with that. I think when I'm studying the Bible and I'm looking to apply what the Scripture says, I'm usually asking the question, what is the universal truth of what this passage talks about? I know we talked about that before. Right. And then I'm asking, and like you talked about, assuming that you've done all the work and you know what the Bible means and what it says, my question is, what does this passage that I'm looking at, what does this truth, how does it rub against our culture specifically? How does it challenge our culture? How does it challenge the predominant ways that we tend to think? And then usually for me, if I'm teaching or if I'm leading a Bible study, I'll usually start with that. I'll start with the cultural mentality, or I'll start with the problem, and then try to get to the Bible and talk about how that truth how that particular truth addresses our situation culturally. But I want to draw that out of the text. I want to draw that out of the passage that I'm looking at. And so I agree with you. Usually when I'm filtering through and I'm preparing for a sermon or I'm preparing for a Bible study, I'm trying to imagine an audience, and in that audience, I'm imagining usually someone who's biblically illiterate, someone who, and I get this all the time. I know you get this all the time. People are like, "Hey, I'm bringing my neighbor this week," or "Hey, I'm bringing my unbelieving friend," and I actually like that because it helps me remember to think about them as I'm preparing. Like, you don't know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the Gospels. You know, what is that? And so I have to stop and explain. So I think that those things are helpful and necessary for me as I try to get to application.
I actually think if you don't do that, it's a very unfair thing. We say this a lot. It's kind of an old saying around Grace now, but we would say, we're not going to tell you what to do without telling you how to do it. And so it's unfair. If you don't have a background, it's like looking at a third grader and saying, you better get that algebra problem done. Well, that's unfair. And when they're not equipped to do that, right? So when someone is biblically illiterate, they've not grown up around the church, they have no Christian marriage, no Christian context, no godly father, nothing that would frame this conversation at all. And then to look at them and say, you need to go live a morally healthy life that pleases God. They literally don't even know what that means. Right? So bringing this down, it's not apologizing. It is in their own language, their own context. And then to look at them and say, for instance, you're living with a girlfriend or boyfriend, you're living immorally. The first question that person's actually going to say is, no, I'm not. What do you mean? I'm faithful. See, so you've got to bring the scripture all the way through and kind of make the conversation, make the argument, bring them to a conclusion, and then give them something to do with that, or you just beat them up. And it's no fair. So I think the application is always the audience. It's like the number one rule of public speaking, right? You learn this like in the 9th grade, like know your audience. It's the audience, it's the audience, it's the audience. I think a leader, if you're doing a Bible study, if you're teaching, if you're leading a life group, you have to decide who that audience is, because it's usually mixed, right? So I got believers who know the Bible inside and out, I got an unbeliever. I know on the weekend services here at Grace, we've chosen to say it's the biblically illiterate, unchurched person, right? Now, if you're doing a close-in Bible study or close-in discipleship group, you may define that audience differently, and then go to that audience with it.
That is so good. I think one of the objections people have a lot against that kind of thing too is they'll say, "Oh, that's just watering it down. You know, you're just watering down the truth."
No.
And I think they couldn't be. That's the furthest thing from the truth, because truth is truth, and helping someone understand the truth in a practical way is very powerful. And I think there's a huge benefit to demonstrating to the others who are listening how to do that. Like, it's a demonstration in itself of how to, in a loving way, help another person understand like what the Bible teaches. So it's huge.
I think that the Apostle Paul is so clear that we are to be persuaders, not debaters. And when I debate, I can throw my degrees and my vocabulary at you, and I can make you feel dumb, and I can win a fight. That's not what a spiritual leader is called to do. We're persuaders. We persuade, we shepherd, we help. And that's why it's not watering down. It's just the start. It's just a starting point. It's not where we're going to live. It's where we're going to start. Right? Move people through.
I love what you guys are saying in the sense that like the application then is something like by knowing our audience, we can actually use whatever is in our toolbox to actually apply the gospel to a given situation. One of the things that's in our toolbox, it sounds like you guys are saying, is thinking through this application. So I think that's tremendous. So thanks guys for being here and for sharing what you did.
Sure thing.
Thanks.